Coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline, Iran's crown prince shocks the world with his first ever visit to Israel. Why he believes Iranians can overthrow the Islamic regime. And his message for the West. Plus, a brutal power game in Sudan threatens the Abraham Accords and takes hundreds of lives. And civilians in Taiwan take up arms, ready to defend against the Chinese invasion. Plus, the creators of the Jesus Revolution share how the blockbuster film is changing lives around the world. All this and more on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The most prominent Iranian to visit Israel in modern history says the radical theocrats ruling Iran can be overthrown. The son of the former Shah of Iran told a crowd of international journalists in Tel Aviv it won't take foreign armies, just the support of foreign nations.
I have often argued that the threat is not the gun, but the finger on the trigger.
This idea comes as Iran inches closer to a nuclear weapon, Israel considers a possible military strike, and the international community looks to negotiate its way out of the threat. Exiled Iranian Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi calls that last part foolish thinking.
I have never believed that any type of negotiation with this regime that cannot be trusted could be a guarantee, or if you will, the safety mechanism on the gun. It has been, in my view, a waste of time. It's going to be letting the Iranian people liberate themselves from this regime.
Pahlavi outlines what he thinks it would take for Iranians to rise up against the mullahs and how other nations could figure into regime change.
Help the Iranian people succeed in their campaign for freedom. Help them with technology, help them with internet, help them with funding a strike fund to help our workers to at the right time go on strike. This is the quickest way and the least costly way to achieve that result. And by doing so, not only you have helped a country free itself from its oppressors, but you have also eliminated any element of threat associated with this regime.
Israeli Intelligence Minister Gila Gamliel, who invited Pahlavi to visit, says Israel has high expectations about what this connection could mean for the people of Iran.
We are already building the aid infrastructure. We are going to meet at the water desalination plant. He's going to meet with top specialists on the subjects of solutions for the drought crisis that's very difficult and complicated and endangering the water in the area.
She adds, rather than being Iran's enemy, Israel could become an ally.
We are going to make available technological knowledge of the state of Israel to show the continuing potential, to show the immediate realization. That is, it's the vision of the Crown Prince to show another Iran that can give the answer to their population in the best way.
Pahlavi points to the Abraham Accords and its impact on relations between Israel and regional Muslim states.
Hopefully, we'll be able to elevate the Abraham Accord to the Cyrus Accord, which will include Iran in the package once we are liberated.
Pahlavi's historic trip here began at Yad Vashem, honoring the memory of the 6 million Jews during the Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremony. He then prayed at the Western Wall, met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and visited Rabbi Leo D., whose wife and 2 daughters died in a recent terror attack. Pahlavi says the Iranian people have a belief that's opposite of the country's hostile regime.
They are thrilled by the fact that I have had an opportunity, not just as of myself, but on their behalf, to spread the message of how, contrary to this regime, they have no antagonism to any nation or any faith, but quite the contrary.
He says their vision of strategic and powerful relations dates back to biblical times.
They see a vision where, and specific to Israel, the biblical relationship that Persians have had since the time of Cyrus the Great. When I was at the Wailing Wall, the remnants of what Cyrus the Great contributed in rebuilding the temples is still there for all to see, is a testimony of how valuable and how durable this relationship should be.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
Israel fears a deadly power struggle in Sudan could jeopardize peace with the East African nation. Sudan joined the U.S.-brokered Abraham Accords in 2020 in an unprecedented step toward normalization with the Jewish state. Now, Axios reports Israeli officials are very concerned that fighting in Sudan could destabilize the country and endanger the already stalled peace process. The army and a rival paramilitary group are locked in a battle for dominance that erupted over the weekend. Just 2 years ago, both sides worked together to mount a coup that overthrew the government. So far, the fighting has killed hundreds of people. Israel isn't taking sides in the conflict, but is calling for a ceasefire. Coming up, as Taiwan readies for a potential Chinese invasion, ordinary civilians are learning to take up arms to defend their land. Inspired by Ukraine's ability to fight back against Russian forces, Taiwanese civilians are signing up for combat readiness exercises. Dozens of private companies are offering classes on urban warfare and military first aid as the island readies itself for potential conflict with China. George Thomas has more from Taipei, Taiwan.
For Carl Kuo, China's intention to take Taiwan by military force looks and feels more real with each coming day.
Turn on the news, and almost every day you hear how tensions between China and Taiwan are escalating.
The 24-year-old Taipei native runs this shop in a popular market area of the city. He says Beijing's military drills simulating a total blockade of Taiwan have his family thinking about how to prepare for war.
We've discussed taking basic weapons training, getting more money out of the bank, storing some food supplies, and planning a possible escape route.
Many here worry that if war comes, this thriving democracy in a strategic corner of Southeast Asia will be extinguished.
We don't want to lose our way of life. Taiwan is a very friendly city, a very friendly island, and people are good to each other. It's a democratic society where the leaders are elected, not by military force.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year sent a chill across this island nation of 23 million people, with some drawing comparisons between Putin's obsession with taking over its neighbor and Xi Jinping's determination to annex Taiwan. A popular saying among people here is Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow.
5 generations of the Communist Party leaders had always put unification as one of their priorities. They were incapable of delivering that, but Xi Jinping is a different person. And Xi Jinping believed that right now probably is the peak of the Chinese power.
And that's why many Taiwanese point to Ukraine's continued resistance against a much bigger invading army.
The unity displayed by all Ukrainians has been inspiring to us, and it should also serve as a warning to China that they should think twice about attacking us.
Polls show an overwhelming majority of people here, over 70%, willing to defend Taiwan against any China invasion. Taiwan has been paying very close attention ever since Russia began its military offensive against Ukraine back on February 24th. And as this island nation prepares for a potential invasion by her neighbor China, the one thing they're focusing on, just like they did in Ukraine in the initial opening days of the war, is the idea of creating a Taiwanese civilian defense force. And that idea led to an explosion of private companies here offering defense classes to civilians.
The key to the international community's intervention in the possible conflict in the Taiwan Strait is Taiwan's determination to defend itself. The war in Ukraine by Russia has confirmed such a theory. Only when the people have shown their strong determination to defend themselves and act on it can they convince the international community to help them.
Record numbers are taking classes on how to provide first aid.
At each session, we would ask trainees why they would attend first aid classes. Many would mention concerns about the war in Ukraine. So they start to ask themselves, I am a civilian. What can I do to help? What can I do for myself, for my family, or what can I do for others?
Others are learning urban guerrilla warfare tactics to protect their neighborhoods.
Although I was enlisted for 2 years, I feel that what I've learned is insufficient to meet modern wars. So I found a place to train and reinforce my knowledge. If one day something happens, I could probably be able to return home safe.
Taiwan has only about 170,000 active soldiers, compared to China's nearly 2 million strong army, the largest in the world. The island nation, however, has a larger, well-trained military reserve force than China, numbering about 1.5 million, in case Beijing decides to attack. Still, Taiwanese businessman Robert Tsao says that's not enough. The tech billionaire is pouring millions of his personal wealth into training and equipping some 3 million civilian warriors in the next 3 years to defend their island home. Admiral Lee Si-ming, former head of Taiwan's armed forces, tells CBN News that his nation needs an immediate move toward a resilient and united society like Ukraine to face a menacing and dangerous neighbor.
If you really can develop this kind of the willingness, develop this kind of capabilities, then the enemy, the China will consider, even they can destroy our Navy and the Air Force is successfully landed on our territory, they still need to fight against our regular forces and a lot of the kind of civilian defense forces.
Last week, China and Taiwan held dueling military drills as tensions continue to rise, as China deployed several dozen ships and planes to simulate sealing off the island. Taiwan's army held exercises with tanks, armored vehicles, and Humvees on the southern part of the island. This all comes as Beijing claims it is ready to fight foreign interference in the region, as well as any Taiwanese attempt to gain independence. George Thomas, CBN News, Taipei, Taiwan.
Up next, the revival that swept the nation in the 1970s is now taking theaters by storm. We talk to one of the creators of the new film, The Jesus Revolution, when we come back. Well, in the United States, a new film has taken theaters by storm and demonstrated the power of the gospel. Jesus Revolution tells the story of the historic revival that began in Southern California and swept the nation during the 60s and 70s. The country watched in awe as young people, hippies, turned to God in droves. The new film follows the stories of Pastor Greg Laurie, Chuck Smith, and Lonnie Frisbee as they witness Jesus capture the heart of a generation. Jesus Revolution has surpassed $52 million at the box office, wildly outperforming expectations. One of the film's producers joined me in Jerusalem to talk about its success and message for today. Tell us the story behind the making of the Jesus Revolution.
Well, for those that aren't familiar with it, that haven't seen it, the Jesus movement happened about 50 years ago on the West Coast. Happened in two places. Happened on the West Coast. The hippies they traveled from San Francisco down the coast, and they found a relationship with Christ that just was very authentic. And then it happened at Asbury College in Kentucky, and we see what's happened there, just recently. But that happened 50 years ago, and this revival swept the country. And these kids that were kind of burnt out on drugs and looking for, the right things in the wrong place, found a relationship with Christ. And it was just so authentic, and so we in my generation hasn't experienced anything like that. It was so present and real. And so it was a story. We did a movie called Woodlawn about 8 years ago, and that dealt with the end of the Jesus movement. It was a football movie. But there was a magazine from Time magazine that at the end of that we ended the film with, and it had Jesus on the cover, a portrait of Jesus, and then it said the Jesus Revolution. And then we traced back to, 3 years earlier than that, in the late 60s, there was a cover that said, it was an all-black cover that said, "Is God Dead?" And my brother became obsessed with this idea of what happened during those 3 to 4 years. It must have been seismic to shift it from "Is God Dead?" to the Jesus Revolution. And so as he researched it and talked to people that lived it, he just said, we have to do this movie. And so we sat on it for a number of years, and then this year, John came back and he said, this is the year. We have to do it. And so he had an urgency to it, and we didn't know what God was up to with the Asbury revival and everything that's just recently happened. But God, just the timing was just absolutely spot on. It's a powerful story.
Yeah.
Oh, for us, it was a privilege.
Tell us a little bit about the making of the movie. What was it like behind the scenes?
You know, it was exciting. Again, my brother John directed it with a friend of ours, Brent McCorkle, and then I produced this one with Kevin Downs and others. So, you know, with this one, it was deeply personal to my brother. But when they started bringing it to life, these are characters that are larger than life characters. So Chuck Smith, who started Calvary Chapel, and it became a denomination that spread across the United States. I got baptized again while I was here at the Jordan River, and there was a plaque that was dedicated by Chuck Smith there, and it had his name on it. And just, you know, you see the impact of people like that. And in this film, Kelsey Grammer just brings him to life in a whole new way, and really portrays a very human kind of pastor's heart of this pastor that his church was dying, and he had this radical idea of let's open the church up to the hippies. And then on the other side of the aisle, you have Jonathan Rumi from The Chosen, Jesus from The Chosen, plays Lonnie Frisbee, the hippie evangelist. And this guy was a complicated character, but he had a power to him. And he came in and had just experienced Christ coming off of drugs in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, and came to share the good news down the coast. Was hitchhiking and ran into Chuck's daughter. And when Chuck met Lonnie, it was nitroglycerin. It was like, it was just an explosion of power. And then there was a young kid named Greg Laurie that was a 16-year-old kid that had just gotten saved off drugs. And so each of these men had a perspective into the Jesus movement that was special.
Kelsey Grammer, was it a life-changing experience for him?
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. Kelsey, you know, he said he was at a moment of reflection and praying on his back porch, and just said, God, I would love to do something with my life that really matters. And after that, the next day, the script for Jesus Revolution came across his desk, and his agent had sent it to him. We had offered it to him, and he said, I'm going to do this movie. And when it got done, it made a profound impact on his spiritual journey. And he talked about it like he was on a lot of the New York talk shows, like The Tonight Show. He was on Live with Ryan and Kelly. And when he was on there, he got emotional. He said, I'm so proud to be a part of this. This is the most important thing I've ever done. And it really, I think, re-infused his spiritual life in a whole new way with his relationship with God.
This is not a spoiler alert, but when I was watching the movie, there's a really crescendo, and things are awesome, they're great. I thought that was the end of the movie, but it goes into some dark places.
Yeah, it does.
And I was watching an interview with Greg Laurie last night. He says, you know, you tell those stories because if you don't, I mean, there's so many Bible stories that aren't so good either.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the story of David without all the failures.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you look in the Bible, and there's a reason why the mistakes are in the Bible. Because I think otherwise it's easy to memorialize these people as superheroes and forget that they were human beings. And I think the point of the Jesus Revolution and other stories like that it should be, is God chooses to use messy people. And it's in the mistakes and in the flaws that God really gets the glory. Because I don't think that Chuck was not perfect, Lonnie was not perfect. Lonnie was very complicated. Chuck made mistakes. Greg was this messy kid trying to figure it out. And all of them came from kind of a lot of brokenness and failure, especially a lot of the hippies, that they said it was kind of a movement of orphans. But in the midst of all that messiness, God showed up, and his spirit did something special. And so the movie, I think, it goes with some of those complicated conflicts, but in the midst of that, there's a power.
Yeah. Andrew, great to be with you.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
If you haven't had the chance to see Jesus Revolution in theaters yet, there is good news. The blockbuster film is now available on streaming platforms. You can order your copy on Apple TV and Amazon Prime, and even host your own watch party with family and friends. Still ahead, a rare moment on camera. Iran's crown prince lets his guard down and reveals how he really feels about Israel. Sometimes beneath the formality of a press conference, you hit upon a spontaneous moment. In Tel Aviv recently, the Iranian crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, was asked if anything surprised him about Israel and what he liked most during his trip. Here's his candid response.
I was not expecting such a high degree of friendship and welcoming. I did suspect it from the Iranian Jewish community, but at the level of Israeli citizens, it was amazing. I mean, the other day, whether it was after a lunch session we had at the walls, and just a regular family and the way they approached me, or some casual tourists at the Museum of the Holocaust, or generally even in the location where I'm staying. Just people just showing up, you know, shaking my hand, saying how happy they are that I'm here. What can I say? That's really the true sense. I was not expecting this level of not only friendship, but I guess solidarity for the cause. That's also one aspect of what I felt, because they know how critical this could be in changing everything between what's now and what could be. And in a way, it's like they are embarking on a journey along with me and my compatriots. And that's a very strong sentiment. And of course, this is so far my third day here. I was moved by having been in Jerusalem, not for the obvious reasons, but I find it an amazing city. I just fallen in love with it. And there are very few cities in which you have that sense of, I don't know, a mystic feeling. Maybe a city that I felt like that was the city of Fez in Marrakesh. Some of you in Morocco, I don't know if some of you have been there or not. I don't know, there's something in there. And outside of the fact that historically, of course, Jerusalem is known for many things, but I don't know, you get a certain sense, a certain vibe, and that was very impactful on me. So I bet you I'll be back here perhaps with my family and my daughters to be able to just do a family visit just for that.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blasts so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.